Hi there, it's Rob from Photographic again with the part 2 of the follow-up screencast from the Patchings Arts Festival for all you guys who came along the workshops. This part screencast, following on from last screencast, which was looking at Lightroom and using Lightroom in a basic workflow to give you a nice efficient process to get the best out of your photographs. This second part of the screencast is now looking at a basic high-level overview of the Google Nik plugins. There is also a third accompanying screencast, which is actually based around some of the discussions we had on the workshop, looking at creativity and vision and how you could make your photography a little bit more personal to you and take it to the next level. Okay, so we're going to get on and kick off now with using the Google Nik plugins within Lightroom. They are, of course, available to use within Photoshop as well. Ever since Google bought the plugins out, or bought Nik Soft out as the company, the plugins have come down an awful lot in price. You can get the full suite now, which previously used to be probably £600–700, depending on the exchange rate at the time. You can get the full suite now for circa £100 and quite a bit less sometimes, so somewhere between £80 and £100. Okay, so what we're going to do, we're going to give you a sample workflow and a very high level overview of the Google plugins. What we will do in further podcasts is I'll actually go and I'll actually have an in-depth look at each of the plugins and how they work and how you can integrate them into your workflow. This one is primarily to give you an overview of how they work within Lightroom, but also give you a basic overview of some of the features and some of the creative effects you can get from the plugins and how you might want to use that within your photography. So the first thing we need to do within Lightroom itself is choose an image that we want to edit it. Now, what I tend to do, there'll be 2 or 3 ways of doing things. If I've created an image and I've done a lot of my editing in Lightroom, I will then utilize some of the Nik plugins quite extensively, depending on the creative output I'm looking for. So what we're going to do is initially we're going to use this one image that we processed in the last video. First thing I'll do is create a virtual copy of this. So we're working off a new copy. It doesn't take up hard drive space by creating a virtual copy. It purely almost creates like a second reference to it. Okay, so once we've got this file, what I'm going to do is look at the Nik plugins in kind of a sequential pattern as how you might work with them within Lightroom. There are some of the plugins are very much about very specific workflow techniques, in that we've got sort of pre and post sharpening plugins under Nik Sharpener. We have a plugin that works with colour and light called Viveza, which is another excellent plugin. We've got a plugin that will work specifically with black and white, and that's the excellent Silver Efex Pro, probably one of the best black and white conversion tools that's out there, I would go as far as saying. We have Nik Color Efex Pro, which is specifically for working and creating color effects within your images and different kind of enhancements based on and around color. Both have all the plugins have a lot of presets in them to give you a starting point, and they all work off fantastic U-point technology, so you can be really precise in your editing. It's almost kind of very similar and akin to working in Photoshop with the adjustment brushes and the dodging and burning tools, and being very, very micro. Obviously, if you use the plugins in Photoshop, you can use them as layers as well, which is one advantage it does have over using them in Lightroom. But don't be put off by that. They are fantastic and work extremely well in Lightroom. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do, I'm going to take an image such as the one we processed already. It's in the develop module. I've created a virtual copy of it. So to access your Nik Soft or Google Nik plugins, you'll go to Photo, on the top menu bar and come down to edit. Now you've got a number of options here. If you've got Photoshop installed, on my main system I've got Photoshop CC, and here we've got Photoshop CS6. So you can choose to flip your image out into Photoshop first, should you have Photoshop as well and you want to use your plugins as layers. But you can, if you look further down here, we can roll straight into the plugins and use them in Lightroom as editors. Now, we've obviously, if you remember the podcast that we did on this video, we've already worked through and we've done a lot of the pre-sharpening in Lightroom. So I'm not actually going to show you this Sharpener Pro on this image. I'll actually open a separate image to do that. But what we might want to look at here certainly is I'm going to look at some of the stylizing ones. So we've got Color Efex Pro, which is the one working with color effects and some fantastic presets. We've got Silver Efex Pro, which will take us to black and white. Excellent tool again. And we've got the new Analogue Efex Pro, which is another fantastic plugin via Niksoft as well. The ones that tend to be a little bit more specific in that we've got Define 2, which is for noise reduction, a fantastic tool if you have to shoot at high ISO for maybe an indoor shoot in poor lighting or late in the evening. We've got the Sharpener tool, which has a raw and an output sharpener. That's again a very specific tool. And we've got Viveza, which is for working with colour. Let's say, so on this specific image, I'm going to demonstrate to you some of the plugins that we can use on quite a stylized way. So first thing we'll have a look at is Color Efex Pro 4. And simply from this photo and edit list, you just click on the filter that you want to work with. It's going to make a copy of it anyway, so we could have got away without actually creating a virtual copy of our image, but I do like to create virtual copies and be in the habit of doing that within Lightroom. Okay, so our software launches for us. If it's the first time we've used it, we might get some, or we haven't switched them off, we might get some tips. Generally, the software will launch and it's not always full screen. That's one thing we can easily fix, so we'll make that full screen. So in Color Efex Pro 4, if we look down the left hand side down here, this is where we have all our presets, and we can scroll up and down and look at the different presets. There's an absolute mammoth amount of them. We're currently in the black and white conversion. But we could choose any of these just to have a look at. You'll notice from the top here that they're actually divided up, so we're currently not filtering them out, we're looking at all of them, but you can mark some of these presets as your favourites. You can specify the list based on landscape photography, so nature, things you might use in wedding photography, portrait photography, architecture, and travel. So it's a good way of just thinking about how the plugins work with different types of photography. I do tend to leave it on all because I don't always subscribe to kind of the rules that, or guidance that some filters work better with other things than others. I take it on an image by image basis, and it all depends on what my creative vision is for the image. Okey-dokey. We could also scroll down here, and if we look further down, we've got an ability, we've got one which is called recipes, which again is some more presets based on a combination of the above filters. And this can give you quite often a very stylized view. And you can also, the interesting thing here, we can actually create our own recipes as well, which is really, really good if we have a kind of a processing style and a combination of filters that we really like. And to access any of these, it's just a simple click yes, and that just literally applies this recipe. And as you look over on the right hand side where our filters are, we can actually go into the details of all of the filters that it's applied. But as I say, the recipe is a combination of filters. So this is sort of, as I say, we're looking at a graduated neutral density filter, brilliance and warmth, tonal contrast, a vignette lens, and a pro contrast. So this is kind of giving us quite a stylized look. If we moved further up, And it will always give us a warning that adding one recipe removes all the filters, so which is good. We don't want to kind of layer filter recipe on top of recipe. And again, we can see how quickly it is to change the look of an image using recipes within Color Efex Pro 4. And again, just click over the 2 or 3. Some of them, you'll actually look and absolutely hate them, and they just won't work for you. But again, depending on what your output, what you're actually trying to output, and what your creative vision is for an image, you may find something which is suits your needs. If we look over on this right hand side, when you go into any of your recipes, it gives you all the individual filters, and within this filter we can click the drop down arrow and we can actually edit it and move the sliders as we would working on any of the filters within Color Efex Pro 4, and it will make kind of its changes to the image. So it's a really brilliant kind of feature for us. It certainly gives us a lot of control over these recipes. So I'm going to scroll back up here and we come over to the left hand side. Again, you can look at kind of recipes all on the currently sample ones, but you can actually go online, you can import recipes created by other people, and you can make your own, which is a really powerful thing. When you build a set of filters down this right hand side here and get to a look or a style that you really like, you can actually save that as a recipe. So any combination of filters that you apply, you can save as a recipe and give it a name, and then it will appear in your filters, in your recipes list. So I'm going to go back up to the top here, and I might decide that I don't want to use this recipe, or it's not something I want to work with. And again, if we want to change any specific part of our recipe, we can easily click on another filter, and that will literally just replace that one within the whole recipe. We can do that with absolutely any of them. And so again, it's a very easy way of creating a completely different look or a style to an image and or a set of images. Once we're happy, if we are using recipes and individual things, we can, once we're happy, we can save, and this will take the image back to Lightroom for us. If we don't like what we've done, we can literally, this is the brilliant thing about the Nik package, is that you can just click through and we'll delete the recipes. We'll delete the things we don't like. So here we go, we're back at our base image. And we might have come in and we might think, well, actually all I've come in and all I want to do is kind of just work with a little bit of contrast. And here we can kind of, as you see, it's fairly commonsensical. It's a case of just picking and moving your sliders and looking what effect this actually has on the image as we process it. And as I say, you can push it as far as you want and take your image from being a very natural looking to quite a stylized image indeed. As I say, we might want to do something very specific to our images, and it's very easy to do this using the Nik Color Efex Pro 4 plugin set. We can also come quite easily, kind of, if we're feeling quite arty and we just want to kind of add a little bit of kind of something different to our image. Again, we could go into a kind of something that tries to emulate film. Again, and within all of these, there's an awful lot of presets that we can use. And again, these are just a simple way of clicking through. So that's really, at a glance, Color Efex Pro 4 and what it will do for us. So again, I'm going to go back into my Pro Contrast, the one that I actually again, the great thing about these tools, and you'll see a lot of similarity as we flip between them, as they all have a lot of points that cross over. So they've all got the shadows and highlight protections. If you see, we make the slider like we do in Lightroom, and it kind of lifts the detail down here in the shadows. We can, as I say, we can add filters and stack them and save them as recipes. And the great things about using the Nik package as well is that you can add control points, so you can it's almost like masking out, so you can apply a filter to a specific area of an image, or you can mask it out so it doesn't apply to areas where you don't want it to apply to. So again, this can be a really powerful and valuable feature of the Nik plugin. So once you've worked with them, you would just click Save, and it will flip us over back into Lightroom. And we'll see our image update in Lightroom, and obviously because we've got the tone curve, the highlights clipping warning on, and we can see just the editing maybe have been a little bit aggressive on some of the highlights. So we've got a little bit of highlight clipping there. So, and again, the cool thing about it is we can go back in Lightroom and make those edits and changes post using the filter. So again, another really powerful tool, and it's good to see the way that they work in conjunction with each other. Okay, so that's us working with Color Efex Pro 4. We'll flip back now into our grid view. I'm going to take an image that we've processed already, and I'm going to spit it out into another one of the sort of image editing technique tools that will give us some quite stylized effects. So this time let's have a look at, we'll have a look at this image for now. So we'll create a virtual copy again. And again, that's purely because I like to work in virtual copies, just for almost like a non-destructive editing process, and to maintain that in every sense. We're in our develop module. We go to photo and we'll go to editing, and now we'll have a little look at the slightly more stylized Analogue Efex Pro 2. And this one's it's one of the newest filters. It certainly is the newest filter in the Google Nik range, and some people think it's a little bit gimmicky, but again, it can add an element of creativity to your image processing and your image making overall workflow. So we're going to flip this image now into Analogue Efex Pro, and what Analogue Efex Pro 2 is trying to do, it's trying to emulate a lot of the old analog sequences that we would have worked with, whether it be in film or with different types of camera or different types of chemicals, how we may have processed them. So if we have a look over on the left hand side, and again, once we come into it, you'll recognize we've got the left hand side where a lot of the preset panels are. We can scroll down and see at a quick glance how it affects the image with just some basic editing. On the right hand side is where we can actually make the adjustments to the basic filters within these presets. Again, this can be really powerful, and we can add extra ones to it and save them as well. And any of these, let's say if we just click on the arrow at the side of it, means we can drop down and make changes to the settings that it's given us. And again, they're all very visual in that we get feedback immediately. So as we move a slider, we'll get feedback straight away on what changes this is making to the image. So we load a preset on here, which is classic camera 4. And there you go, straight away we can see it's made changes to the images. And again, we can see how easy it is to click through. A lot of these will have very interesting stylized features in terms of simulated scratches on the plate itself, and different color adjustments. And again, trying to replicate different types of film that we may have shot with in the past, and we can come into them and tone them very easily. One thing you will find, and I think it's definitely worth pointing out, is the more and more you push an image, the more editing, the more maybe creative you get with the processing, and further away you take an image from maybe a classic landscape scene, the more and more kind of this kind of heavy duty processing will show up kind of dust and speckles that you might have had on either your filter or your sensor on your camera from changing lenses. And unfortunately, it is an inevitable thing that you will pick up dust if you use a multi-lens system and do change lenses as careful as you will always try and be. Unfortunately, it's a given that you will pick up dust at some point as part of your process. Okay, so we've had a look in here where initially we're in the classic camera section, but we'll see here that we can we've got a lot of basic tools that we can work with from here: film types, vignettes, blur, and then we've also got different types of kind of cameras and very stylized finishes that we can do. And as we'll see down here, almost as we built recipes, we can build a camera kit, so we can use a lot of these different tools and techniques to build our own camera kit. And again, it can be really interesting. As we click on each one, we're now going to wet plate, and we'll see that a lot of the kind of the shortcuts, of the presets that we get given, completely different to the ones before. And again, now it's trying to emulate kind of a wet plate photography process. Again, some people will like these, some people will find them useful, others will find them that they don't really like them at all. And again, it's something that you don't have to use, and use it if you really want to. So as you can see, we've had a little look around some of the filters and the options that we can work with. I do love this I'm feeling lucky button, which just kind of gives us a very kind of stylized and random effect, and you shall see on the right hand side how things change. It really is quite interesting just to see what it actually does to the image. And again, if you're struggling for a little bit of creative kind of inspiration at times, sometimes it is quite funny just to kind of, well, not funny but creative, just to play with some of these effects and just see what it does for you. So that's that's Analogue Efex Pro. Obviously, as we do on all the other Nik ones, we can add custom ones, we can import settings, and the great thing about it is again, we've got a history like we have in Lightroom. So anything you've done or undone, literally click through it, and you can take this setting, take all these settings back off again. With a simple click, and there you go. It'll reload what it's done and take you back to the state where we started from. Absolutely brilliant, and we can sort of work out where we came from and where we got to. So again, it means that anything we do can easily be undone. So there's never any fear about actually enjoying and playing and using these filters just to see what you can do. So that's Analogue Efex Pro 2, and again, a simple save back if we want to take it away. But as I say, you can edit and move any of these sliders really easily. You can change the presets, you can change the way the filter reacts just by a simple click. And I think it's one of the really cool things about some of these Nik plugins is, yes, you can have utter minute control and keep everything very subtle and become a classic in its styling, or you can be as creative and as kind of extreme as you like in your publishing and your processing. So it depends how you want to work. And again, if you're happy with something, you click save, and that'll flick it back into Lightroom for you, and you'll have that copy of that image created in a matter of moments. And it will appear in our library. And so as you can see, we've got our original file, and then we've got any number that we've created from this, and the same here. Right, so that's kind of how we've worked with those ones in a very quite a very stylized way again. What I'm going to do is kind of create another virtualized copy, and we're now going to have a quick look at Silver Efex Pro 2 and how we might want to turn an image black and white. Again, this isn't going to be the most in-depth kind of technique tutorial on how to use the Nik plugins. We'll actually do some more of them, and they'll be very, very focused on individual plugins and individual features within them to give you a really in-depth look. This is just designed as a high-level overview of what the plugins are, and to give you a bit of a helping hand in deciding if it's for you. Obviously, the great thing about them are, as with Lightroom, is you can download a trial and see how it works for you, so you're not tied into anything. So we're going to go into photo and editing and Silver Efex Pro 2 now. We're going to flick our image over to a black and white one. Again, Lightroom and Silver Efex will now do their jiggery pokery and work together. And there we go. In a quick little bit of a kind of a quick click of a mouse, we've taken an image over to a basic black and white transition or process. It might not, I mean, for me that one, it doesn't feel very powerful, it doesn't feel impactful, so I might initially want to look down my filters list and see if I can find something in the presets which gets me a closer starting point. I think that's one of the key things, is to find a good starting point for where you'd like to be. You can start right from scratch and do everything yourself, and I will often do that, but certainly never be I'm never one who's too snobbish to look through the presets and see if something gets within the ballpark. So that's certainly definitely what we've done here. Is I'm going to use this one, use the high structure smooth to get me in the ballpark. And what we will do on Silver Efex Pro is I'll just give you a brief overview of how we'll use the settings then to change the kind of preset and get the image close to what we want. And again, as with working with Lightroom, we've got the panel on the right hand side which will tend to work downwards and work through our settings fairly sequentially. Again, you'll notice on the left you've got your presets and they're sectioned off again to different sections. You've got custom, you've got imported, and you've got history. Again, there aren't any recipes on Silver Efex Pro 2, but that's not to worry. We can see what we're going to do. Okay, so the first thing I might want to do is, as I look at an image once I've got it in Silver Efex Pro 2, is I will kind of often look at creating a really nice contrast. I do like kind of really strong deep blacks, and I'll quite often use my Amplify Blacks tool, and you'll see that straight away on the screen as you move the sliders what effect this is going to have on your image. And as we look at this image, we can be quite aggressive with it. It really does bring in quite a bit of interest. What I do also tend to do, if I do amplify the blacks, I will also amplify the whites a bit, because I say I do love that kind of real nice contrasty deep blacks and good solid whites as well, without blowing them out. And if we're unsure, we can sort of look at histogram here. So we're currently in loop view. I've just closed it off, but I can flick that over to histogram so you can see which kind of where your image falls along that kind of histogram of all your kind of tonal range of your data. One good thing you've got under here is what we call the zone system. Anybody who's familiar with Ansel Adams' work will kind of know all about Ansel's kind of reference to his zone system in his film photography. Now, what Silver Efex does very well is it transitions this into the digital sphere. So again, you've got your black and white tonal range represented by 10 zones, from 0 being sort of full deep black, no detail, to white being sort of full white and again no detail. And you can click on any of these, or you can hover over these zones initially, and it will show you within the scene where these tones are represented. So again, it can be a good way to make sure you've got a good tonal spread as well as looking at your histogram. The other great feature of it is if you can click on one of these zones, and I do tend to do this with the whites, the zone 10, is it will actually leave zone 10 markers on, so if we've got any blown out highlights anywhere, it'll leave us a little grid pattern to show us, and there's a little bit in here we can happily zoom in if we'd like to. Again, you can see from zooming in that we've, the grid pattern is now shown as where we've got blown highlights. And again, what we can do is move down to our tonality protection and use the highlight slider just to recover these that little bit to ensure that we've not completely blown and killed the highlights. We can zoom back out on this image. And get it to a size which I want to work on. Okie dokie, so we've now protected these highlights, which is good. If you click on here, it literally takes you back up to the default preview. If you click on it again, it takes you back down to the zoom setting we've set. So we're back in. We know we've protected the highlights that we had in the middle. What we might want to do now is also I also tend to do is I use my soft contrast a lot. It's really good for getting some nice deep black skies, and I'll kind of shift this either to the left or to the right. And again, this is where you can, if you push them too far, your images, as you can see, can look absolutely mentally stylized. So you've got to be very careful in how you use these sliders. So again, we can just find a setting that works for us creatively. In hindsight, I'm just going to take it back to the 20% that it actually came in on. We scroll down again a bit more, and as you can see, we can, as well as working with the contrast as we've done, we've worked with the blacks and the whites, and soft contrast separately. You can work with it quite globally, but I do tend to use the sub sliders. I find them so much more powerful. And again, within structure, we can also do this. We've got an overall structure slider, but what we can do is we can work on structure in specific tones within our image. So we can work on the structure in the highlights, the midtones, and the shadows, and the fine structure, which again can be brilliant for kind of working with detail. So if we want a bit more structure in the darks, we just drag the slider up or down. Absolutely brilliant tool. So I'm not going to worry too much about actually processing this image to how I might want it. I'm just going to literally use it today just to demonstrate. And again, we've got control point technology where we can select this option, select a certain area, and we can have a very specific and targeted effect on a certain area of an image. We'll keep scrolling down here. Anybody again who's used to using film who would have used coloured filters to give very different effects and how different colours react to the light. So again, we can apply these simply with a click. We can apply the red filter, which tends to enhance the darker colours in the image. We can work through, and as you'll find, some of them just won't work, or you might prefer the look that you actually got originally. We've got our film types. So again, in here, this is where Google Nik Efex Pro 2 tries to emulate a selection of film types. Don't like all of them. I do, depending on the type of image I'm shooting, there might be some that I use. I do like, certainly on people and street shots, I tend to use Kodak Tri-X 400. Probably, again, due to the fact that it's a film I used to shoot on sort of 35mm camera, and certainly one I would use when doing people and street photography. So again, I'm going to put that one back to neutral because I was very happy with the level I'd actually got. And again, we're looking at, under this setting, we've got grain sensitivity levels and curves, and the little kind of triangle at the side means we can drop that down and alter the fine detail within that section. So it's always worth knowing. Then as we move down, we know we've got the finishing and adjustment section. So this is where we can split tone an image. And again, it's something a lot of people did in the film days with black and white photography. I'm not going to change this one too much. We can work with our vignette to focus the eye of the viewer, or to add a very stylized kind of view of the image we're trying to create. So I'm going to go for quite a dark one here. Not quite dark as number 3. bring it in. We're going to lens fall off. We're going to lens fall off number 1 on this. And the great thing is here you can then affect the amount of the vignette again as well. So we can move the slider, and again we could add quite a really stylized view of a scene. And the great thing about it is you can change the shape of your vignette, you can change the size of it, and the most powerful thing I think about using vignettes in Silver Efex Pro 2 is where you can place your center. So if you've got kind of your focal point is off center, you can place your vignette here and it'll shift that bias of the vignette, so you've got view in this corner still, and it darkens this area up here. And again we could bring it down further still, and again to maintain the detail we wanted down here, and bring the vignette in above. I think I did quite like that where it was there. So easily to work with, easy to switch off. We can darken and burn edges of the side of our image. Easily to work with again. You choose your edges, choose the strength, the size, and the transition. And again, something that's very easy to do in Lightroom, or in Nik, and then dropping back into Lightroom, and sometimes often easier than flipping out into Photoshop and changing your canvas size, is easy to add a border, and as well as kind of some lovely clean borders. Now what I want to do here is just go back in my tonal system, switch the zonal warning on number 10 off. The reason I add a warning on zone 10 is zone 10 being complete white, and if you're printing an image, I would probably argue it's best not to have zone 10 in your image because it's complete white. So what you're going to find is that your printer isn't going to lay down any ink at all, and it can look a little bit odd, that kind of, as you've got a printed area with an interesting tonal range, and then an area with no ink laid down at all, and depending on the type of paper you're using, again this can have really different effects, and not often the desired ones you want. So I'd always try and maybe in the zonal system have a good split, but I'll try and avoid zone 10. I will use zone 0 full blacks more for a creative purpose than sort of worrying about the fact that there's not going to be any detail in it. Okay, but now I've switched my zone 10 warning off, you can have a clearer look at how a nice clean border will look, with a white and a black clean border. And again, this might not be something that you want to do for your image, as it might be. But as well as the clean borders, you've got a number of fairly stylized, kind of rough edge borders as well that you can work with. Again, something that would be very, very difficult to do in Photoshop. And certainly in Lightroom, I think near pretty much impossible. So certainly the Nik plugin selection here in Silver Efex Pro gives us a really, really good option, and enhances the things we can do with our photography. And if you choose any of the borders, you can change the size, the spread, and how clean or rough the border is, and vary things quite dramatically. Once you're happy with your image, if it's something you think, well, yeah, I'm going to go with that one, again, as we've done in the other ones, you flip this back out into Lightroom by clicking Save. The image will save, and then it flips us across into Lightroom, and Lightroom will update, and there you go. Hey presto, with a click of a button, we've got a really kind of impactful and dark and moody black and white image without doing too much work at all. I'd say I will often get a lot more in depth and work with the settings, and I'll do this on an image by image basis. But here you can see, just by the simple process of a few sliders and a few presets, how you could get quite interesting stylized images. Okay, so I'm going to flick back out now into my overall image view in my image catalog, and we're just going to pick an image now where we've not actually done any work specifically on at all. So I'm going to pick this image, unprocessed, picture, a close-up detail shot of some architecture on the Arkwright building at Nottingham Trent University. Fantastic. So engraving on this building. I was lucky enough to have a photo shoot where I was upon some scaffolding on a building across the road, sort of 4 or 5 floors up, and get a unique view and level across to this architecture. Now I've not done any editing at all to this. We've just literally brought the raw file in now. or have I? I've done a little bit, as you can see. We've not quite brought the raw file in. This is my edited version, and we could click reset here, and it'll give us a completely unedited version. So if I click reset, there you go. That takes it back. This is the file brought into Lightroom as was. So if we click edit and undo reset, so we can see where it's gone. What we'll perhaps do then is create a virtual copy, and we'll reset this virtual copy back to its original image. Right, now this is where we're going to have a look at some of the other Google Nik plugins and see how functional they can be. Again, we've got raw and pre-sharpener. This is something that we do, I've been doing in Lightroom in a lot of the previous podcasts. But you know, this, you can see here where the Google software can be, again, be very, very powerful. So click OK. Just wait for it to load. And here we can work with the sharpening. Again, we've got control points. So we can add control points and sharpen areas. Again, as we did in Lightroom, we used masking, but here we can sharpen areas on a very specific level again. And again, it's just by the use of sliders where we affect the amount of sharpening on the image. We can virtually take the sharpening off, and put it on again. And by double clicking any of them, it will reset them. There we go, we could add some control points. We could just work with the image as we've sharpened it. And again, it's fairly simple just to work with the sharpening. And again, one thing I will sort of add cautionary tale is if you're too aggressive with your sharpening here, you can see we've got some red and some green fringing there because I've been a little bit aggressive on that sharpening. This is where we've introduced some chromatic aberration and something we would have to fix in Lightroom. If we take our sharpening back off, we can see we've managed to remove that chromatic aberration. Let's say once you've done your editing in Sharpener Pro, you would literally save it back into Lightroom. Simple as that. Okay, what I'm going to do now is then I'm going to have a look at how the export sharpener might work, and we'll use an image that we've already worked on. I'm just going to pause for 2 seconds. And welcome back again. I'm back in. Right, as I say, we've done we did our bit of pre-sharpening on the image. We're going to have a quick little look now is we'll have a look at another one of the tools in terms of noise reduction. Now it might be a little bit difficult to show on this one because it's not got masses of noise in it, but we'll flick it into Define 2.0 and we'll go full screen. And again, the brilliant thing about Define is it assesses the image. As you can see here, it's analysing the image and it will do a lot of the work for us. So it's going to measure and reduce any noise that's in the image. If we hold our mouse over any area on the scene and then we look at the bottom right hand corner, the left hand side in this loop view is where the kind of before, on the right hand side is the after it's applied the kind of smoothing out. As you can see here, it's showing us a little bit of a hash mark, so it's showing us where there is some areas of noise, and this is kind of the area that it's trying to work with and actually control. And we might expect to find some noise down here because we're in a little bit of shadow. So it's done a very good job. And the great thing about it is, again, is you can put it onto manual mode and you can work with very specifically. So if I go onto manual mode, you can measure certain areas. So I can kind of think, well, let's have a look at this area here and we'll measure the noise. And then it does its sharpening, and then it does its noise reduction based on the area we've looked at. I mean, we've chosen a very, very big area there, so it's not necessarily the right one to work with. Again, if we do anything we don't like, it's as simple as a reset. And again, when we're going to reduce, we can also use control points. So we can work with color noise and contrast noise and actually assess them and work with them manually on very specific areas of the image. What most people find is that just by going into Define and clicking measure on automatic mode, is it will find any areas of noise and it will do a very good job of fixing them for you already. And you shouldn't need to do too much more. Once you're happy with it, you just save it and flip it back into Lightroom and continue your editing process. So that's kind of Define 2.0 and how it would work for us. The final one is called Viveza, and this is the one that works from colour and light. So we're going to flick a copy out again. Here, as you see, I'm still working on an image that I've done no editing on at all at the moment. And this is where Viveza comes into its own. And again, certainly use your control points as can, but you can work very good and very effectively globally. So you can work with the brightness on a scene. So here we're going to lift the rock, add some contrast into it. So again, to maintain these nice kind of textures and tones and almost 3D effect on this rock here, we can alter the color saturation of the image. I know a lot of people, you can go as kind of crazy and as delicately as you like, so I'm just going to bring the saturation up a little bit on this image to bring some of these lovely kind of subtle orange tones out. And we can work with the structure, so that's almost like the micro detail and the micro contrast on an image, and on something like rock it works very well. And again, what you will see is if you push it too far, it can look a bit crazy. So word of caution is to work subtly on any editing you do in photography. Unless you're being very kind of stylized and doing something for kind of ultimate creative effect and it's not going to be a classic scene, then you can be as wacky as you like. So if we watch the image now, as we move the structure slider, we can bring again more detail into this stonework. So I'm just going to keep it reasonably safe and reasonably. We'll click save. This is the first one of the last few that I'll actually save back to Lightroom. And there we go. We'll see our image that we've edited now appear in Lightroom again. And this is the great thing. We might notice that we've introduced a little bit of chromatic aberration. We can then go back into Lightroom and do our Lightroom editing. So I can enable my lens profile correction. I can remove chromatic aberration. That's where Lightroom will do a brilliant job. I can then do all my leveling. So I can use my angle tool. And if I decide that I want this line across here to be dead level in my image, draw a line across there, double click, and there we go, that's leveled my image off. And we can, again, as we showed in previous videos, we can use the crop tool and we can be as selective as we like. What we can also kind of do is we can work with our radial filter. Let's bring it down here. So I'm going to invert the mask and I'm going to lower the exposure round the out. Zero that. I'll lower the exposure by uninverting the mask again, around the outside of the image just to focus the eyes in the middle. Add a little bit of contrast around the outside and maybe darken those shadows a little bit. And again, the good thing about these masks or this radial filter is we can change the size of it on the fly once we've actually done the editing. So we can decide where we want our focus to be, and there you go, we can easily affect where our editing's worked on the image. And click done. Okie dokie, so we've gone out into our Niksoft Google Nik plugins and come back in to Lightroom. I've done a little bit of editing just to kind of take it on a stage from where it was. What I might want to do now is go into photo and edit in, and this I'm going to show you the final one, is the output sharpener. So this is where we're thinking about the output purpose of the image. So what is it going to be? Is it going to be for print? Is it going to be for web use? And if it is for print, what type of paper will it be on? what size is it going to be, how far away is the viewer going to be from the image, and these will all affect our sharpening. And this, on our output sharpening, this is where we talked about how Lightroom only has sort of 3 settings on output sharpening. Here, in terms of one being screen, one being matte, and one being kind of glossy paper, here we've got a lot more ability to work on output sharpening in really targeted and effective ways, depending on what we're using it for. So we've got display, which is screen again. We've got different types of printer and devices. We can work with the sharpening and the sharpening strength and the structure and the focus. So here we can think about how close the person is going to be when they view it. And again, we've got control points which allow us to sharpen the image on a very, very targeted point, to just target certain areas, to bring the viewer into different areas of the scene. By quickly clicking on these kind of settings, we can see if we go into inkjet, we can set our viewing distance. So if it's going to be a massive print when somebody's going to be stood a long way away, it's a lot more aggressive with its sharpening. We can select our paper type, which again can be absolutely fantastic, and there's a lot more detail and fine-tuning we can do than in Lightroom. And we can select the printer resolution, so the size we're going to be printing to. And it could be an absolute bang-on full resolution image. And again, if we look at kind of our sharpening now, depending on how far away the viewer's going to be, we can see what fantastic changes. And again, depending on the paper type, we can see what changes it will actually make to our image. And this is where Nik, the Google Nik Sharpener Pro plugin, is absolutely powerful, and probably one of the most powerful in the set, and probably in terms of how you can use it to sharpen your image depending on the purpose. I'm not going to save this one right now. I'm just going to click cancel and we'll go back into Lightroom. But what we've had is a quick overview of how all the Google Nik plugins, how they work with Lightroom and the different purposes you might want to use them. In subsequent podcasts, we'll spend more time individually on each plugin and different features of it, and we'll show you how to use it a lot more. But this, for now, it's been Rob Knight, it's been RK Photographic, and this has been podcast 2 from the Patchings Art Festival, just showing you how to work with the Google Nik plugin suite.